Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Co-host Rich Gear here as well. And, well, Doug, we're going to do, chapter 6 in your new book you're writing?
Yeah.
And it's called Where People Get Stuck. What do you mean by that, Doug?
Well, I think there's a real tragedy that we see happening when you have people who have been brought up in the church, kids that get brought up in the church, and then they go on to college and they take science classes or geology classes, and they get fed this story about the deep time and long ages and the geologic column, and it looks also scientific and interesting, and it draws them in, and they also compare that with what the Bible says, and the two narratives don't work together.
Well, here's the thing, Doug. I can tell you, it was much earlier with me. When I was in first grade, I knew every era, epoch, and eon of the geologic uniformitarian thing. I didn't know it was called uniformitarian. And I remember having a debate with a nun about when the brontosaurus, at that time, it's called a patasaurus now, but now they're trying to bring the brontosaurus name back. So I don't know where we're at exactly on that, but name and nomenclature is what it is. But that was in second grade, Doug.
In second grade.
And I was already, and then I remember when I was in sixth grade, I was already doing a lot of artwork. We had to do this whole thing about the geologic time, and then there was a big thing about with the because at the time I was in the Catholic Church, and they were saying, well, is there a contradiction between this and what the church teaches? And then they said, well, evolution is okay as long as you're not dealing with man. So there was a compromise. But I was in sixth grade. I obviously did not have the wherewithal to realize I didn't even understand what contradiction was around. But I remember when I went to college, Doug, I thought I was so clever when I came up with a theistic evolutionary concept for time, long ages, and it's not original at all. But boy, I sure thought I was original. Well, God started it. He set up the day. He had no idea of the conflict between a true biblical statement, worldview, and the geologic deep time. So, Doug, where do you want to start with on this?
Well, let's talk about the geologic column itself.
All right.
You have eras, periods, epochs, and then you correspond them to different kinds of creatures that you find in the geologic column.
Right.
And these are all set up in an evolutionary sequence, and so like you have the Cenozoic era, and which composes of the quaternary and tertiary periods, and then you have epochs, which are recent, Pleistocene, Pliocene, Miocene, Oligocene, Eocene, and Paleocene, and then
the most famous one. You got the Mesozoic that comes after.
Mesozoic, we have
that.
Cretaceous, Jurassic, and Triassic periods.
And of course, everyone's familiar with Jurassic from the movies, Jurassic Park. But yeah, that's the middle. Because Mesozoic, Cenozoic literally is kind of recent, and then Mesozoic is kind of middle.
Right.
Okay. Then
the Paleozoic is Permian, Pennsylvanian, Mississippian, Devonian, Silurian, Ordovician, and Cambrian, and then they have the Precambrian era.
What I like, it's like 600 million years, and Precambrian is 4,500 million years.
Right, yeah.
So it's 4.5 billion years old, okay? But there's this big gap between 600 and 4,500. There's a huge one between Cambrian and Precambrian. So it's like anything below a certain point, it's just old. It's Precambrian,
Right, and so it's and the Precambrian, of course, is where you don't find any fossils, and we creationists have our own interpretation of these particular periods, but they correspond to the different stages of the flood.
Yes, correct.
And we would classify the Precambrian as being pre-flood rocks or creation rocks.
Right, we talked about that last week. And what rocks would they be? The granites?
the granites would be like what you see up in Canada, the Canadian Shield.
Okay.
Is all that kind of rock, and you have, but you have sedimentary rock, which composes all these different eras, periods, and epochs, which, unfortunately for evolutionists, if you have sedimentary rocks, you can't date them with radioisotope dating methods.
Well, Doug, the thing about the age of the earth stuff, we actually know. I mean, I had a book called The Devonian Controversy, and I think it was in 1809 when this was going around. And 1809 was, what, 100 years before the radiometric ideas actually came? I'm not sure when first radiometric dating systems.
You had Libby in 1953 with the carbon-14.
That's much, but I'm talking about the ones that revealed the long ages. I don't know when those came.
Oh, they came later.
Yeah, they came even later. Yeah. So really, you talk about almost 200 years between the actual preconceived notion, the a priori assumptions that the world was millions of years old. Now their age of the earth was much younger than what it's come down to us now. I think 100 million years, or maybe it's even less. Maybe it was even just a couple when I first came up. But the point of it is that everything except Precambrian is based on this sedimentary rock sequences.
And you date the fossils by the rocks by the fossils you find in them, and then you date the fossils by the rocks that you find them in.
Yeah, and this is the thing I did not understand when I was doing this for years. Even as I become a creation in my nature, I did not realize that it doesn't matter what kind of rock it is. They can be the same kind of rock, and they have two different kinds of fossils in it. They will date them differently. And as I said, before radiometric dating ever came in, they already had the theories that it was ancient. And now, and why does that work? Because you can't date sedimentary rock by radiometric processes. It doesn't work. You have to have intrusions, which means some volcanic rock, igneous rock, has got shot up inside of a thing. And that's basically what they've done in a lot of respects. But even that is suspect to interpretation and basically assumptions. And there's a lot of assumptions to go on. We'll get into that in a minute here, but unless you want to get into it now.
I wanted to talk about carbon-14 dating because that's become our friend in the cases where you have sedimentary rocks like limestone or coal. Well, you can take that substance and date that, because that was laid down at a certain time, and but the half-life of carbon-14 is pretty short.
So, Doug, before we get on there, maybe why don't we explain the differences, the way these things work a little bit, so people, for those who are not aware of this, carbon-14 still talks about half-lives. So does rubidium, strontium, and potassium argon, but they're different in the way they're done. One is based on things that were once living,
right?
Because you can't do radiometric dating on fossils. It doesn't work, or sedimentary rock. Okay, but you can do carbon-14, and carbon-14 has a very very much shorter what they call half-lives. In other words, every you're going to lose half of what's called the parent isotope to the daughter. I think I used the right term. You can correct me if I did wrong. But carbon-14 is unstable. Carbon-14 is stable. In 5,700 and 30 years, 5,730, you'll lose half of what was already in at the point of death of the organism. And
they don't think to date these with carbon-14, because if you do, you get a young age.
Or if you get any carbon-14 at all, and let's say an unfossilized dinosaur bone, or in coal, or the matrix of a diamond, they never look for it because these are supposedly millions of years old. There will be nothing left of carbon-14. And here we find why has carbon-14 become our friend, Doug? Because we're finding it everywhere. Even in unfossilized dinosaur bones, which shouldn't happen either. Unfossilized dinosaur bones, like we've got some hadrosaur, duck-billed dinosaur that have been unfossilized, and some other things as well.
It turns out what they do is this is sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that they come up with, because they make the assumptions of evolution when they do the dating, and if for some reason it doesn't fall within their parameters, well, usually what they do is throw the results out.
Yeah, because and here's the thing. Sometimes you'll get dates that are astronomically too old.
Mm-hmm.
It does happen the opposite way. It's like you get something that's like a rock on the Earth that's like 45 billion years old or 20 billion. No, that's not right. So that's gone. And the thing is, when they do these dating things, you have to basically destroy the sample to start with.
Right.
So you can't redo it. And once it's done, the sample is destroyed. That works with carbon-14 as well. But rubidium, what are some of the different radiometric?
Well, the one that is used for the longest ages is the decay sequence for uranium-238.
Okay,
Yeah,
uranium lead, is that what?
Uranium to lead.
Okay.
And it goes through a whole bunch of different isotopes before it becomes lead. And what they assume is that the lead that's produced in the rock sample, it all comes from the uranium-238.
Oh, yeah. So, Doug, why don't we do that, Doug, while we're at it? Let's go down your list of assumptions, and we can talk about each one once you get them. So we just want to get through all of these so we know. So assumption number one, Doug.
Is the rate of the decay is constant, and it hasn't changed over the course of the life of the rock.
Okay.
And that's...
Okay. Audience, hold on. And assumption number two.
Is we know the initial physical makeup of the rock and the quantities of radioisotope elements when it was formed.
Assumption number three.
The rock has not been contaminated by the introduction of the daughter element.
Assumption four.
The parent element has not been leached out of the sample.
Assumption five.
All the measured quantity of the daughter element came from radioisotope decay of the parent element.
And assumption six.
There's other physical processes, such as differential solubility in water, are not responsible for altering the ratio of isotopes.
Okay, so we got them all through there, folks. Now we're going to talk about them a little bit, if we as much as we have time. So let's do assumption number one.
Well, one of the things I think the study that was done around 2000 to 2005 called the RATE study, radioisotopes in the age of the Earth,
Yes.
Is that they believe that this assumption is not true, is that it is possible to alter the rate of decay of the radioisotopes. And the question I have is, how would you know? Over the course of millions of years, how do you know that the rate of decay remained constant? And they've been some experiments have been done where they've been able to physically alter the rate of decay of a sample.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's that problem. So we can't know that the measurements that you're taking of the ratios of the elements in the present actually determines how old it is, because that's the very first assumption is something that is in question.
See, Doug, that's what gives you the number two, which really is one of the biggest ones for me. We know the initial physical makeup of the rock. How can you know something 4.5 billion years ago, or 600 million years ago, or 320 million? How can you know that the physical makeup of the rock was one or another? How could you possibly know that? And so talk about that. Go ahead.
It's sort of like trying to take a look at the things that you find in the present and determining what had happened over the time for it to get there.
In other words, how do we know that the rock was not 100% uranium and no lead, or 50% uranium and 50% lead, or any ratio? How do we know? How can you possibly know that? There may be experiments they may be able to think they can extrapolate, but no one can know. And some of the things we've seen, Doug, on volcanic eruptions in recent history have really proven the lie to some of these radiometric datings. The potassium argon is one of the most. Contamination
of the sample with argon, it is during its formation will cause the measurement of the sample to give a unreasonably old date.
Right, you got the thing, that's assumption number 3. The rock has not been contaminated. Yeah, but how do they know that? It's only when it gets the date they want that suddenly it's not been contaminated. This has to be true because why? Because of their a priori assumption, not because they have any empirical data. It's because this is the date they want. So anyway, all right. So yeah. Oh, and then the fourth one is a corollary to it. That the parent element, so the rock has not been contaminated, but the parent element has not been leached out of the sample.
Yeah.
So how what about that, Doug?
Okay, what I pointed out to my friend Charlie Wolcott, who's actually going to do a international creation conference presentation on this coming up here in July. He took my idea that differential solubility in water is a possible cause for why you have the ratios skewed to being such long ages.
Well, you talked about that. We've talked about that on the show before. Yeah. Uranium salts, the potassium, and then to me, there's an obvious
rubidium and rubidium strontium is really a good example of this because rubidium salts are very soluble in water. You have this alkali metal which forms an ion, and the ion is very soluble in water. It's like salt. Salt.
So Doug, got to keep an eye on it. Never mind, I couldn't resist. You gave me a straight line. I had to get in there. Anyway, Doug. So
all right.
So the solubility. This leads me immediately to think of in terms of the worldwide flood.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
And so he is talking about running some experiments where you take a sample and do a radioisotope dating on it first, and then run water over it.
Oh.
And see what
that's science. I like that.
See how that affects the date, and do another date, and you will get probably a much older date because you will leach out the potassium or the rubidium or the uranium, which are highly soluble, forms highly soluble salts. And so you don't have an open system here. You don't have a closed system where everything's self-contained. Everything that comes becomes the daughter element came from the parent element.
See, to me, that's almost kind of almost another assumption that it's a closed system.
Right.
When they get the dates they want. And that, to me, is a big assumption in and of itself. We didn't list that here, but because we skipped by through...
They'll tell you, well, we've got zircons. So zircons is where you have the closed system. Well, it is a hard mineral, but it's something that we don't know during its formation how these different factors played out. As rocks were being formed, we don't know any of that, and so what they want to do is to make sure if you do a radioisotope date is that it correlates with what they expect it to be.
So, Doug, how does that do? Are you addressing what is it? The isochron, where they measure? They have different, let's say rubidium, strontium, and potassium argon, and they do 2 or 3 different ones, and they get the same dates.
Yeah, well, the same assumptions affect those.
Exactly.
Both of them. And so, if they have both faulty assumptions, you're going to get a faulty isochron date.
Yeah.
So, it's a problem. And when I remember taking a class in MSU many years ago, and where I had an independent study with a geology professor, and I called these things into question. Well, he didn't like that very much.
He didn't flunk you, did he?
Well, he told me if I wanted a grade, that I would have to rewrite my paper to from an evolutionary point of view, or at least present both sides. And I said, yeah, I do want a grade, and I can write fiction as well as...
You said that to him? You said that to him?
Yeah, no, I didn't say that.
Oh, you were thinking it very loud.
I was thinking it very loud, and I said, well, and here's the thing, is that you're not going to convert your professor. And that's something I learned, when you're a young Christian and you're eager to share your faith, and you are going to... but your degree is dependent upon the grade that you get in your class. It's a good idea to stay in the closet and to get your grade, give them the answers that they're expecting. But
did your daughter do that one time?
Yeah, she was in 6th grade.
Yeah, so this is the answers you want, but these are the real answers. I can't. It was wow. That was pretty good.
Yeah, she was pretty bold back then. You know? Well, she's a firecracker now, but that's the sort of thing is that you are, if you're studying and you're trying to get a grade and you're trying to get your degree, well, it's good to actually show the professor that you learned the material that they expect you to learn, and not to try to convert. Yeah.
So anyway, so Doug, some of the dating methods, the radiometric dating, you've got them listed here: uranium, lead, potassium, argon, rubidium, strontium, samarium, neodymium. Is that how you pronounce that?
Neodymium.
Neodymium. And I remember there was a lead, which I guess is kind of like... Yeah, that's a different one. But they're all based on the same assumption. They're the ones who give you the long ages, specifically uranium, lead.
Yeah. That's you have argon also.
Oh, argon, okay.
And what it is different. The potassium argon goes through certain stages, and one of them is an isotope of argon, which converts to the stable argon.
So, and then of course you got carbon-14, which is anybody, I'll tell you, Doug, anybody that says carbon-14 and they use that as an argument to prove millions of years, I know they're either lying or they're an idiot. Okay,
they don't know what they're talking.
Yeah, they don't know what they're talking about, because that has really been the creationist friend. I am so excited about that carbon-14, because that one is the most easily calibrated. If you think, and even it can have its own problems. We've seen issues with it too. What was it? I remember Dwayne Gish years ago had a tract, and they tested a live mollusk and found it to be dead for 3,000 years. Mm-hmm. So there are things even with that, even when you got it right in front of your face.
Well, what's really funny is that John Wood Morripy, he documents in his book Mythology of the Modern Dating Methods, where they even came up with negative ages.
Oh, is that right? Negative ages. That's pretty good.
And so that's kind of weird, how all this thing existed must exist in the future,
Well, yeah. Anyway, so we're not trying to ridicule it, because on the surface, Doug, it sounds so scientific. They're calibrating it. Mm-hmm. They measure this against this one, but without you understanding how many assumptions that it's predicated on and how much their a priori belief system affects what they want to see, mm-hmm. you can't get really to the truth of any of this stuff. We say this a lot, and people say, well, you're just trying to interject religion. I said, look, if you believe something and you can't test it, repeat it, or observe it, that's religion too. You may call it science, but it's a secular humanistic religion. Yes, I go into a theistic religion. I believe there was a God, which makes more sense to my brain that how things could happen. I don't always understand every process or how it works the same way, but I know that the secular religion does not have even remotely the answers you need, and it is based so much on assumptions. So people, why are you getting stuck with the long ages? And why, Doug, is it even important? Why do we care about geology at all?
Well, we do care about geology because if you actually take it for the way that the Bible describes it, the Bible has a mechanism for the geology that we find in the world, and it really explains why all over the planet you have these different layers of sedimentary rock laid down, and hundreds of feet of thousands of feet of sedimentary rock, miles and miles. 12,000 feet down you find coal and oil, and you have all these rock layers buried where all these carbon deposits are, the fossil deposits.
So for those going farther, it's like sedimentary rock was initially, it could be any kind of rock per se, but it's been ground up and it's laid down by what? Water action, correct?
Water action, yes.
Yes, by water all over the world. So we have a planet that's 3/4 covered in water, and the landmass is 3/4 sedimentary rock, and yet you have a hard time believing there was a worldwide flood. This is to be ludicrous when you think on the surface of it, and especially when they're trying to find Mars that was covered in water at some point. It's nothing but a desert planet at this point in time, as far as we know. That's aside, but the point of it is that we have sedimentary rock, which is laid down by water action. You have igneous rock, which is volcanic, and then you have a third one, metamorphic. This is like marbles from limestone, right? It's
right.
By
and
pressure
basically, the flood geology model is catastrophic plate tectonics, where you have the Earth's surface was actually resurfaced by continents moving.
Yes.
And it's being subducted catastrophically under the continents, and it sort of sucked the layers of rock underneath, and so then all the rock layers that were actually deposited on the ocean floor got buoyed up in the continents, and so you have all this uplift taking place, and you have the formation of the mountains, and people ask the question, well, how did all of the mountains get covered by water? Mount Everest is so high,
29,000 feet or whatever it is, yeah.
But that didn't exist before the flood. The flood model shows, that the mountains that they were covered were much lower.
Yeah, maybe 8 to 10,000 feet at the most.
At least, yeah.
Yeah, at the most.
But it really shows you that there is a good model from a biblical standpoint that explains all of this. And people need to understand that there is research being done by creationists that takes the data that we have been provided by the geologists, and we've got great data, but the people are not really interpreting it properly to be able to give a good model of.
And why aren't they interpreting it, Doug? To me, the point of it is we talked about this before the show a little bit, and we're running really short on time, but geology was the thing that allowed for long ages for something unseen, i.e. evolution, to even occur, which really can't happen. But the idea is that geology gives you this foundational principle for long ages, which undermines the biblical timeline entirely. And that's, to me, the whole thing. A lot is why it's important, why we study it the way we do.
Well, we'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.